Okay, so for everybody who's sort of just joined us, we've been running a series called the Tuesday Interview since the beginning of the Fine Art Pathway, but they've taken place in the college through Skype, and we've had various artists who've joined us. And what we've done is that we've made websites and web links and articles on the artist's work available to allow students to prepare a series of questions. But this is the first one that we've done since lockdown. So in the past, we've done it in a room and it's been on Skype. So this is the first one that we've done that's taken place on Zoom. And obviously anybody can ask questions of Natasha, but we've specifically asked 5 foundation students to prepare some questions for Natasha. So I'm gonna hand over to those students, to Albina, Polina, Ina, Sasha, and Ksenia. If one of you wants to start and ask Natasha a question. Thank you.
I can start. So, hello. I want to ask you about 2 questions. So the first one is, in your art practice, major number of works are made in white, which in some sense means no color. And why did you decide to reduce it and work mostly in monochrome? And do you think that an addition of any color raises some amount of questions which are not only unnecessary but even interfering?
Yeah, you answered my question. Your question probably answered the question. I guess, like, so you're right, I don't ever use, I mean, I use paint, and paint is really important because paint, because of what paint does, it is wet and then it dries, and it dries at a particular speed. And when it dries, it leaves a residue. So the material of paint is really important. It's clearly like totally central to the practice, but it's the material of paint that's important. So, and the behavior of that paint. And in a way, what's really interesting to think about is whether there's an equivalent material that would dry at that pace, and I've often thought about what the equivalent of that material is. If you think about wax, it needs heat, and it would dry very quickly once there was no heat applied to it. Or if it was cement, it would, or, you know, so if you think about like what paint can do, paint is central to the work. So the material of paint is central to the work. It is wet, it can drip, it behaves in a particular way, and it leaves a residue. And that residue is also really important because it it documents, so it has the potential to document its own movement, in a sense, which I think is, and in a way, those are the things that I'm really interested in. And so what you need to do, if those are the things you're interested in, is try and stop the interference that colour might cause. You know, so if you were to use a particular colour of paint, then it may well, what I suppose is, it starts to talk about other things apart from paint. So the immediate use of red might talk about, so it feels like white is the closest to no colour. Actually, and also it feels like white is the most neutral, but actually, of course, it's not neutral. So it could be milk, or it alludes to kind of other minimalist paintings. So Robert Ryman. So it's not without reading. You can't ignore the fact that white also can promote a kind of reading beyond itself. But I think it's the closest that I could get to a non-colour. It's also household paint, so that's the other thing to remember. Like, I don't use, so it's like literally very, very typically a paint that we would paint our walls in. You know, it's like you would go to a DIY shop and you would buy that paint from a DIY shop. So it's always the same make of paint, made by permaglaze, and it's always diluted to the same consistency. So there are certain rules that the work operates within, and that's kind of one of them. Is that? I mean, it's like something I think all the time about, and I've definitely had in the early years where I made the painting machines that you saw, that so the machines that dip, that move the painting into and out of paint, which in the article, the article written by Ed Allington, he's got the image of one of my machines. A art dealer asked whether I would make a big red one. Like, you know, would you make a big red one? And it's like, because people were in that moment, like, quite interested in owning the machines. So, and in fact, 2 of them ended up being kind of sold to kind of art dealers, which raised really interesting questions, because actually at that point you give the potential to someone else to make your work, and actually they could put any colour they wanted through them. So there is the potential to kind of break my rules and introduce colour if that's what you wanted. But when I used to sell those early painting machines, they would come with a kind of contract which would say they were only authentically my work if they were white, if they used this type of paint, if they were. So yeah, that's the answer to that question.
Okay.
Is that your 2 questions, or have you got another one?
No, I've got another one, and it includes 2 questions in one. So I can also write it in the chat if it will be easier to answer.
No, go on. Go, okay.
Okay. So in your text, Failing to Fail, you talk about the possibility to interpret fail in art as another option, or even another way to get an outcome. So in this case, is it possible to say that a failure in art just doesn't exist? And also, striving to fail could mean that you're waiting for a certain incident to happen. However, what happens if an unexpected failure will occur?
So I think what's interesting about the machines is that by the fact that they're machines, they are like, they allude to the idea that they work, they do work, and they function, and they need to. So if you take so we all talk about like a machine being broken, as in it doesn't work anymore. So I think what I was interested in is, with the machines, in a sense, they're like, with an art machine, there is a kind of system. So I set up a system, and then I turn the system on. And the moment the system is turned on, the work is in action. And when it's stopped, it's not broken. It's just in another form. It's in another state. It's like, so the reason that article came about was that, and I'm not a big fan of my own writing, so I much prefer to make things than to write anything. But it was really interesting to think about. So I was commissioned to do a really, really significant, it's one of the biggest works I've ever been commissioned to do at the Lowry. And it was a bit, you know, like, they gave me quite a big, at the time, it felt like quite a big amount of money, and like, to make this thing, and it would wrap around this gallery, and it was months in the planning, and there were lots of things about it that were so the other thing to remember about my work, and you may well know this in your own works, is that I can never ever know them until they're installed. So I can trial them and I can do tests on a smaller scale. But the Lowry, they were like 2 meters by 1. They were huge they were wrapping around a gallery. This pipework was wrapping around a gallery. And I knew I had problems with the consistency of the paint. I didn't want the consistency of the paint to dry too quickly. So I had the paint specially made. Bad mistake at the time. And what happened was the system clogged really, really quickly, much more quickly than I'd ever anticipated. The paint behaved in a way I'd not anticipated it would behave. Now, in a sense, like the work was throwing, like what I think I'm really interested in my work, and more I'm becoming kind of more and more confident that actually it's what the practice is about, is the work throws problems at me all the time, and it throws problems at the people that help me make it. And in a sense, I think it's the solving of those problems, or the kind of trying to keep the work going, that is almost the work. Like, they're quite social objects. So when it clogged, the gallery asked, was it broken? And it wasn't broken. It had just, and I really, really mean, even though it disappointed me, but but it wasn't broken. So in a sense, maybe, like, is that the answer to your question? Like, it disappointed me, but it threw up problems. And in the problems that it threw up, the next work in the next space or the next project, those problems got solved. So it didn't fail, and it didn't break. It just operated in a new way, and a new way that needed my consideration and the audience's consideration. And it provoked another set of dialogues. So another dialogue, so when it's in action, it was wet and smelly and like a kind of magical. And when it dried, it was actually quite ugly. It was like it went slightly moldy. But I am interested in setting up these systems that surprise me, that are kind of disobedient. So they're not like machines to make art. They're kind of like, they're like social I'm interested in them as structures that kind of promote conversation, that surprise me, that cause me anxiety, that cause viewers to be fascinated by them and then stop or go too fast. Or, there's been situations in galleries where they've spilled over and I've been stood in 2 centimeters of paint on the floor. One flew off the wall. So I make kind of disobedient objects, I think, that I try to kind of, and then I get to know them too well, and then they start to annoy me because I know them too much. They're like too familiar or something like that. I think I might have just done a politician's answer.
Okay, that was all of my questions.
Thank you. Those really great questions.
Okay, I can be next.
Yeah.
So, what was your first machine, and when and how this idea came to your mind? Because I read that it came to your mind from other art machines, like printing machines for books, but there are some printing machines for not art, but drawings, like production. But how did it even come to your mind to make a machine for fine art? This is like so special.
So like, that's a really nice question, and it's really trying to figure out how you practice as an artist and why. It's a bit like in a sense the answer I just gave. I think when you make art, like the thing you make raises a load of questions for the next thing you want to make. It's like, you probably know that already. Like, so you do some tests or you do something in the studio and it doesn't work, or it does work, and it raises something, and then the next object you make solves those problems. So the work kind of just leaps from one work to the other, or from one experiment to the other. So I went to the Slade. I did my undergraduate at the Slade and my postgraduate at the Slade. And I got really interested in time. I mean, like, seems really obvious now, but like, I was really, really interested in the walls of the Slade, which is this phenomenally historic art school. That's the walls of art schools have been painted over white endlessly for like hundreds of years. So one coat of paint of white and the next coat. And so I started to make really, and this is an undergraduate, I started to make replicas like of the walls in the Slades, like really obsessively make replica sections. Don't ask me what that is. And then I realised that the coating, like coating them with a brush, and then another coat with a brush, and then another coat with a brush. And so then I started to dip them, like, so I would make these objects, and I'd make these little tanks of paint on the floor, and I was lowering these paintings into these tanks of paint on the floor, and then pulling them out again, and I was doing it by hand. And then I've got a dad, my dad, who now it seems mad to talk about my dad, and I'm nearly 50, but like he makes a lot of my work with me. I remember I don't know, it's so different. It's quite an English thing, I think. You can only ever talk to your dad about like building things or roads, like driving or like building things. That's all I can talk to my dad about. So I actually ended up having a conversation and said, I wonder whether you could make a machine that would like dip a painting in paint endlessly. And he's an engineer, and like not a kind of swanky, you know, like, but he's a really kind of brilliant maker. And I went home. I was a bit older than you, and I went home, and he went, "Oh look, I think I figured something out." And he'd made this piston, and so it kind of, the machine that dips, the first machine, which is the machine that dips, kind of came out of this like this interest in how I would build. So I suppose I was hand dipping things, and then one day in the studio I realised that when you're hand dipping something and it's really beautiful and it's wet and it's dripping and it smells amazing, and you know the studio is filled with the sight and the kind of sound of wet dripping paint, when the paintings were on the wall and they were dry, they were dead, they were somehow like static. So the first machine came from a love affair with wet paint and a conversation with my dad about like whether this thing was possible. And then the first machine which I made for my postgraduate Slade show was the most temperamental machine I've ever made in my life. It lifted the floor, it was too powerful, it knocked things over, it was just the craziest kind of, and it was using compressed air. So it didn't feel weird to make a machine to me, because I wanted I wanted the audience of the work to see to experience what I'd been experiencing in the studio, which was this like beautiful love affair with white, wet, dripping paint. And so it wasn't any kind of highbrow. And actually, if I was really honest, Polina, I didn't know anything about painting machines. I knew nothing about machines that had made painting. I knew nothing about like the death of painting, what the machines would bring up conceptually. And a really great friend of mine who was much more academically clever than me came into the Slade and went, you need to know about painting machines, and you need to know about, you can't make an object like that and then not go and arm yourself with some understanding of, you know, Tangley or kind of all of the, so a bit like the essay that you read, the Ed Allington essay. So I had to do a lot of catch-up work, but it came about because I loved paint, and I wanted you to be in the middle of that wet, dripping object in the same way that I was. That was a long answer.
That was great. And which machine is your favorite one, and why?
So the machines that dipping machines, that's how I met, like that was the first conversation I had with Sean, actually. Like Sean said, I know, so they were so the dipping machines were like were what people knew me, you know, like they became quite kind of well known quite quickly. So people knew those painting machines, and they made incredibly beautiful paintings. I mean they were like, so I made the first dipping machine, and within a couple of weeks I realized that those paintings that it was making were just the most beautiful things. They were like, I could never have made them by hand. They were growing stalactites, they were tiny timelines, they were like beautiful fingers that were growing off the edge. I mean, they were totally gobsmacking. I've only got one painting left actually off those machines, and I keep it like really. Oh, I showed it in a show that Sean organised, one of the Fully Awake shows, and then so I loved the dipping machines, but every machine I like hate with, like, I get totally anxious and they make me feel sick when I install them, because they're really, really naughty, disobedient. They spit, they pump too fast. I can't get them to flow properly. Like, I don't sleep when I install them. Like, I have really, really strange relationship with them. Like, I slept at the Lowry Gallery overnight with one of them because I was so worried about it. Like, I slept on a bit of sponge underneath it because I was so worried about it spilling over during the night. And then what happens is I get to know them too well, and then I go off them because they're like a bit boring. So like, they're not as interested anymore to make, and I know the way they behave and I know how to fix them. So then I get obsessed with the next one. So at the moment I'm trying to build, I don't like the newer ones that I'm making. I'm using like programming, and I'm using programming and little Arduinos and tiny little peristaltic pumps. No one's seen them yet, but like I shared some of them in a folder with you guys. And they are like driving me mad because it's all about programming. So they're quite distant, you know, they're quite hard to, they're not about turning a screw or you have to change a bit of code to make them work. So they are my latest work. And actually, I think I might have realised that that kind of technology is not really what I'm that interested in. I'm actually much more interested in a kind of technology that requires like a screwdriver or a spanner or I am actually quite, even though I make machines, I think I'm actually quite interested in the hands and the care that a person needs to give the machines. So I actually really love the relationship that people who look after them have. So one of the things about the new work, so in Chicago and in more recent shows, they've required someone to attend to them. So like, you have to look after them. And then one of the things I've got really interested in is if you've been one of the attendants to the painting, then you can have the painting. Like, you can, you know, it's quite nice to just give them to people, and then you can either put it in a bin if you want, which, you know, people might well have done, or maybe you just really formed a relationship with them, because they require people to open and close valves. So I've got really interested in that care, the idea of care, and that, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Polina. That's brilliant.
Can I be next, actually?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. When you just talked about this, like, relationships with sort of people and machines, I was just wondering, are you interested maybe in the future to develop the work which would interact with people in the space?
Yeah. So, well, in a way, I think that's more and more like what I am. I have been making. I don't know how you. So I made a piece for Modern Art Oxford. So it's a gallery in Oxford, and the idea was that there would be 9-10 paintings, and they would be installed around a space. I made quite an equivalent machine in Chicago. So, and the idea is that there would be kind of 25 gallons of paint, and it would be flowing around the space around a single line of copper pipe, and that there would be these series of objects that were being filled to the brim, and that they would that there would be these series of paintings that were being filled, and then when they got to the holes cut in the top surface, paint would flow down the front of the painting. And the idea was that no one would need to interfere with them, but actually what happened in the modern art show was that I couldn't regulate the system. So you'd open a valve and one of the paintings would fill too fast, and that would be too fast, and then one of the other paintings on the system would be too slow. So actually it was a bit like weird, because what ended up happening was people had to open and close the valves, and it was a bit like tuning them like a piano or something. Like it was like, so it became this kind of, it really required attention. So I got really interested in the attention the machines needed, and that when a machine needs attention and it draws that attention towards it, other people are also interested. They're like, what are you doing? And like, so they become these sites that for dialogue, or like sites for conversation. And also because they use like quite kind of domestic plumbing, like you know, like, so in Chicago, I used the plumbing systems that they use in the States, and in Taiwan, I used Taiwanese plumbing, and here I use UK plumbing. And so they use kind of systems that we kind of half recognize. People are intrigued by them, so they do become these kind of sites of a kind of social, they're quite social. So the latest, before the Arduino works, the ones before that actually totally required people to open and close valves. And you open a valve, you let the painting overflow onto the floor, and you close the valve. And you keep doing that over and over and over again. So they really, really require, and actually if you don't look after them, they grow mold on them, and so you can tell when they've not been cared for. So they've really, really got people, you know, a kind of a relationship. And then of course there's some tricky ground that I'm on with like notions of people attending to a painting, especially in galleries where gallery assistants in the UK are often not paid. So there's a lot of issues raised. But what's really interesting is everybody's ever been given the opportunity, been given the option to look after one, has totally fallen in love with them. So then now I've got like these paintings all over people's living rooms because they were the ones that they cared for. So people, even though the machine alludes to no people, no hands, no gesture, no artist, no, you know, like it alludes to kind of to the loss of touch. Actually, they're very much about the social, really. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I have more questions actually.
Okay, go for it.
I'm interested as an artist. I mean, you said before that one thing is that inspires you is like the wall, yeah. But what are other things that inspire you? Maybe other artists or some.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit. I suppose there's lots of things I love. Like I like. Yeah, there's loads of artists I love, you know, like Gabriella Rothko, like Baldassari, like quite often quite performative practices. I quite like instructional practices, you know, like so the Fluxus, like all the Fluxus stuff where instructions are the work. Like I like things like, I mean, there's so many things like I love DIY books. I'm obsessed by, you know, like I like things. So, I mean, I grew up in a house where we were always like building a wall or putting in a plumbing system. I feel like so it's quite eclectic, I suppose. What I mean, in terms of an artist that I like would totally love, then I can't. There's probably not one. It would definitely be like there's probably lots. I'm trying to think. I mean, the things that come to my mind all the time are like, I absolutely love Gabriela Rothko's work. I don't know, and actually it's nothing like mine, but it's like, or maybe it's the event, the notion of event in a work that I'm quite interested in. Yeah, I love lots of student work I see in this, I love being around. I mean, I love teaching. I mean, I think I'm interested in, I'm really, really interested in learning. And I think, and in a way, I think, and I think the machines are like, I really like the idea that the machines provoke dialogue and then they become these spaces where you can talk about. I think the machines do something interesting because they're quite, they can allow for quite an that's wrong. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, like, I really love the conversations that occur around the machines. Like, I really love them as spaces to go, what is that? What's it doing? Like, and then people put their hands in the paint and then they go, oh God, oh no, like, sorry. And then, people go, so some of the newer ones are like paintings that have been filled to the brim with paint and they're literally pockets and they bulge like bodies. And people are like, what, how, what, how? And there's something about that lovely dialogue and kind of learning with and through them. And that I really, so I suppose the answer to that question is not very clear. It's like lots of things. I like, and then there's like, I don't know, there's millions of artists I love and lots I hate as well, actually.
Okay, and I was also interested in, as I know you said that your works are like never been, in terms of broken, but maybe have you ever, are you ever thinking of, in a way, coming back to something and maybe like remaking it or improving it, or like sort of, are you improving something every time, or are you just making?
Yeah, no, I mean, like always, like it's always, so I really love that. I really love that the work throws a problem at you. So my latest obsession is the wall, like, and the stretcher frames, like why? So, and in another work, maybe a year or two ago, I wouldn't have even noticed those as problems. But now I keep asking questions about, maybe the paintings have got to be like more like objects, and maybe they've got to trust the wall, like trust moving away from the wall. And like, if you take, so at the moment, if you imagine a painting, I make a stretcher, like a really conventional stretcher, and then I stretch canvas that's really, really been very, very carefully primed, and then I fill the paintings with glands or with tubes, and there are two things that are really clumsy, feel really clumsy now, and one of them is the stretcher, like it just feels really clumsy, and one of them is the grain in the canvas. Now, a year or two ago, I would have paid attention to the grain in the canvas. I would have sanded and like primed so that the paintings had a very, very beautiful surface, but the grain wouldn't have thrown up the same problem. Now it's throwing that problem up, and it's like, okay, so the question it raises, which is what you're all doing all the time, the question it raises is, what's the relevance of the frame? Can I get rid of it? How would I get rid of it? So like, could they be bags? Like, could they be held in the center of a room? Like, why do they rely on the wall? What does that do in terms of them being called painting? Like, could I make the object without canvas? So could I make them out of skins of paint? So could I make the paintings out of paint without using canvas? And so of course, like I think as artists, that's what you're doing all the time. You're like, you make something, it throws up loads of problems, or you attend to it and you look and you scrutinize it, and it talks back at you with all of these problems or all of these potentials. And the next bit of work that you make is in relation to that thing, you know. And I think sometimes you even have to remake a work to understand it, or like to look at it again. And so I think so definitely I mean, then the other thing I'm trying to do is dissolve one. Like I want, you know. So the other thing is, then you start thinking about paint. You know, what my paintings do is they add a layer, and then they add a layer, and then they add a layer. And what would happen if you took a layer away, or you took a layer away, or you took a layer away? So, you know, one of the things, I mean, there are big problems now, but like, you know, one of the issues with work like mine is they're kind of ecologic. They're a disaster for the climate. They're like, you know, they're really, they're made from copper and paint, and there's loads of there are objects that are kind of in the world. And so what does that do? You know, what does the climate catastrophe that we're in do to work like mine? And, you know, so then I start to think about whether I should start washing them away somehow, or dissolving them, or like, so those, like you all, I think when I'm not teaching, or when I am teaching, the work is I'm constantly curious about the work, constantly like agitated by it, or wanting to do the next thing. That's the answer.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was a great question.
Ina.
Yeah.
When we were in the, just before lockdown, Ina was making work where she was painting with her hair. Obviously, since we've been in lockdown, she's not doing that anymore.
Yeah, and since I have no hair anymore, I can do that.
Were you making paintings with your hair?
Yeah.
What's the brilliant performance work where what's her name paints the floor with her hair? Sure.
It wasn't the floor, but it was on the floor.
So Janine Antoni, is that her? Is that who it is, Sean?
I think it is. I might be wrong. But...
Yeah, so I was at that performance. My friend, like, this is one of those weird moments where you're at art school, and it was at Anthony Doffo, which was a gallery in London at the time. And my friend Eva she just left the undergraduate at Slade, and I'd stayed to do the MA. And she said, God, there's a performance tonight where this woman's painting the floor with her hair. And what's really amazing is now you see it in books, and it looks like there was a massive audience. There was only about 4 of us. And it was just amazing. And she dipped her hair, and then she dipped her hair in this black ink, and then she washed the floor. She painted the floor, and she painted everyone that was in the gallery out of the gallery slowly. It was such a beautiful work. Anyway, she had long hair, much longer hair than you've got.
Ina had very long hair just before we came out of lockdown, and she was making her hair.
Yeah.
Very, very precisely with curls, each one being exactly the same. So.
Wow, that's a radical new haircut.
Yeah, I think Sean could share my work after, if you like.
Oh yeah, no, I'd really like to see that.
Okay. So, Natasha, thank you for coming here today. And I have a few questions for you. One of them, is, you're using programming in your newest work. And my question was, have you ever considered involving artificial intelligence into making your machines?
Yeah, I mean, there's an irony in me using any form of programming. Now I am the worst programmer in the whole world. I mean, like, the new works have taken me so I've been doing a PhD at Oxford, at the university in the Ruskin School of Art, which is brilliant, and I've loved it. And I developed the new machines there, and I worked with one of the, there was an irony in that I was at Oxford, and there were probably specialists in technology that could have just made those machines I was trying to make and they could have done it in a minute. But I'm also interested in the kind of clumsiness of my knowledge, and that, like, what it was to kind of like learn the basic programming that I had, and then or I was developing, and then ask, and then learn, and there's a kind of clumsiness. And actually there is something about that. I made those machines that you guys have seen, and no one else, actually the Viva for my PhD, they saw them. But so I'm using really simple programming, like at the most basic level, to try and sense a drip that's falling over the front of those paintings. And when it's dripped, it's telling a little Arduino, oh, I've dripped. I don't really need any more paint in me for I love the way I talk about them like that. Oh, I don't really need any more paint for this amount of time. So, but they're like really, and then they're using little tiny motor driver, really nice little stepper motors. And then ironically, I won a research grant for this Southwest Creative Technology research grant. And I've been working, there's 24 fellows, and it's been brilliant, but they are really brilliant programmers, and they are like, they exist in a different place to me in terms of that level of that knowledge base. And actually it's made me want to make them more about our body and our touch, and the machine's relationship to us, and the social and more mechanical rather than so it's, I suppose it's almost made me not want to make machines. I mean, like it's almost done the opposite. So it's made me want to kind of so in some senses, artificial intelligence and that whole dialogue is around kind of machine learning and all of that stuff is so way above my head that, like, all I end up doing is thinking to myself, oh, how do you dissolve a painting? Or why is that grain of the canvas why have I got obsessed with that grain of the canvas? Could I make a machine that would dissolve a painting? Am I even, maybe I could, yeah. So the answer is no. No to artificial intelligence, no to any form of more sophisticated programming than it's also really interesting programming language, because it's like material, it's actual physical material programming code. Like, you know, you're like looking at the code, it's stuff, it's like, and it's really hard to make sense of. It's not like, so I've loved it, and I've absolutely hated it. And that's, I don't know whether that's that. So I really like the idea of the machines drawing experts to them that help me make them, but I'm also really interested in limiting that. There's something about the limited expertise that we all have, and the kind of clumsy finding out we all do, that the idea of working with someone who has any kind of understanding of artificial intelligence or like really sophisticated programming. I mean, at Oxford, I remember someone saying, God, you literally live around the corner from one of the best, you know, computing departments in the world. And me just thinking, I'm never going to go near them. You know, like, that is it. So I think there is something about the restriction of knowing that can offer something to the potential of an object. Does that make sense?
Is it a kind of investigation of failure as a part of human being, human existence through the machines?
Yeah, that's probably, I mean, it's like, I think it is to do with finding something out, making something work, keeping something going, caring for something, being with, you know, like, I quite like the idea of like the machines draw people to them to kind of keep them functioning, you know, like, and I might be exaggerating that, because maybe no one cares about no one cares about them. But I like, there's something about that I've got more and more interested in. I mean, the new ones, the ones that you've got that I sent in the folder, the idea would be that you turned them on, and they do work like this actually, and once you turn them on, they could just look after themselves. But actually that's not even true. That's not true. I mean, you know, machines like that even need care. They, you know, that bits of code needed tweaking, like, and so it was that tweaking that I'm also really interested in. The person that's like going, oh, just tweak it that little tiny bit. But so it's that tweaking that's also something that I love about them. Yeah. Maybe that's what needs to come over, and I can come over and build one, and you can all look after it. Maybe that's what I'll do.
I have one more question.
Yeah, go
on. So when I was looking through your work, I had the feeling like you said that you built this machine at the first time to delegate the labor. But do you feel like you are kind of distancing yourself from the painting itself?
So I really struggle with like gesture, or like the relevance of my gesture. So I guess that, but then the machines are really thoughtfully constructed. So, and they become quite composed objects in their own right. So like they're clearly my hand is in them. Like if you saw one in real life, and like Sean might tell you the same thing, like they're really obsessive. So they're like, you know, like every tiny clamp, or I never install them without gloves on, so that they, you know, that the metal doesn't change with the oil in our fingers. Like, so there is a sense of my hand and they are authored by me, but there's but actually there's even contention there. So because they're not my expertise all the time. There's multiple voices in that. So I often, you know, might go to our painting technician. We have a painting technician at the art school that I work at, and you know, I might go to him and say, I really want to make a painting that will dissolve, and he'll go, holy shit, what do you mean by a painting will dissolve? And then I'll go, yeah, how can we, you know, how can we do that? And then we'll spend weeks trying to work that out together. So there's kind of multiple experts in the objects. But then, in a way, the painting, and I really love paint, and I really love talking about other people's paintings, but I can make paintings, and through the machines, and I can really love them, or I can hate them, and I can feel this lovely distance from them. So in the first instance, with the really early machines, sometimes they would make the most beautiful painting, and it would just be the best feeling ever. And then other times they'd make these really ugly, weird, a fly would die on it, and then paint would get clogged on it, and I could have these kind of indifferent relationship with them, I guess. So they do raise really fascinating questions around author and gesture and distance, but I'm obsessive with them, totally obsessive. Like, so even though I talk about distance and like this distance that they enable, like, as I said before, if I install one of the machines, often for the weeks that it's on showing or working, I don't sleep, and I'm forever on the phone to the gallery, or they're, you know, like, and at the private view, I never walk away very far from them, because I'm always, one fell off the wall once at an art fair, and so I have this really strange kind of totally anxious relationship with them. Like, now it makes me sound like a nutter. But you paint with your hair, so that's fine. I mean, that's what we do as artists, I think. Like, we can have these really strange relationships with these objects that we make. So they're really distant and really, you know, they're like, I'm really close to them. So it's a kind of, I love that about them. Is that the answer?
Is Alexandra Sazonova with us today? Alexandra?
No, she's not here.
She's not, okay. Has anybody else got any questions that they'd like to ask Natasha?
They were all brilliant questions, by the way. I wish my students would ask questions like that.
Good.
Amazing, thank you.
I'm not a student, can I ask a question?
I think you're allowed.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to ask very brilliant questions. One of them is actually an observation. You know, you talk about obviously machines, the intrinsic part of your work, and also your work has been kind of. I hate this kind of thing, but people write about your work as being part of the expanded field of painting. Yeah. I actually prefer the other title, you know, painting amongst other things, you know, the catalogue.
Yeah, no, it's nice actually. It was a nice show.
I like that title. But anyway, like, going back to machines, you know, it's one cannot help but like thinking of Donald Judd, you know, it's like we're making these kind of boxes in the factory and machines actually make us that kind of emotional distance between the author and the actual artwork and so on. But you're creating a paradox here because although you talk about machines and you talk about distance, you know, in the same kind of within less than an hour, you're talking about feelings and emotions, and you mentioned the word care and obsessive, and all these kind of are very sort of you know, emotional kind of things, and you associate with these machines, and you talk about the details and the kind of gorgeousness of some of the paintings and so on, which goes totally against the kind of whole principle of machine kind of made work and minimalism and so on. And I find that very unsettling, but this is the poetry of your work, really, because it is unsettling. I'm not sure where to place it, and that's kind of that creates energy, I guess. But anyway, my dumb question would be like, what did you do before these machine paintings?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I'm just going to go back to your observation because I think there's something really interesting about it. I think making machines, like, because of the kind of functionality of them, like, so you can have a conversation with someone about a 22mm pipe or a hat, you know, like you can have, so I can talk about a plumbing valve and it might be like my background or something as well. That what I really love is that I can talk about really, I don't mean ordinary in a patronizing way at all. I mean it in like a really lovely way, like the, you know, like painting your door, you know, like kind of this lovely ordinariness to them. And so the making of the machines and that kind of problem solving and what the machine and that kind of, and the distance thing that you just talked about, is like, and I think even in the way that if I give a talk about my work, actually, I often talk about them like really practically. I talk about them in a really practical language. Like I don't talk about their theory or their, and Magnus and Ian at Manchester were really questioned me about it. So they were saying, when you talk about the work, you talk about it in really practical terms. Like, and for my PhD, I wrote a manual for the construction of one of them. So I even used practical language for my PhD, like this really instructional language. And I think there's something so lovely about that language that can then give the permission to do the other bit, like to be the seeping, bodily, emotive, care, feminized, masculine, like the seeping bit, you know, like the bit that you want to kind of go, oh God, that's the bit I don't want to come out. But like what I love about so I could never make work intentionally that was about that seeping, that kind of, that stuff. But I can make the machines that can then do that. It can give me the permission or can do it in their own right. So, and actually the machines are a little bit like that in their own right. So they're like really, really totally and utterly like overthought through. Like, you know, in fact, this morning I was going through drawings, like, they're kind of like, I draw them on graph paper and I think about where every single clamp is going to be. And then when I turn them on, they like, they just, you know, they spit in the wrong place or they flop and it's that the work is about that in a way. It's about like, here's the system. It's really tight. It's really practical. It's totally mad because it doesn't really do anything that we need. It just does this filling and emptying. It fills and empties. But in it kind of brings up that, it gives me a permission to do that kind of, you know, there's often conversations around milk or the body, the female body, seepage, you know, like, but I could never have those conversations without the machine as the kind of, it's like the armature. It's really, and it's lovely. So it's just it's the way I've survived doing it, I think. But it's a lovely way, and I really, really recognise it in the way I talk. Like, so I often do this like really mechanical, and then this like really, then this look like this moment of care and this moment of kind of relational. So there's something really, and actually it's taken me ages to understand that that's what I was doing, I think. And now I can't remember your question.
It wasn't a question, but thanks for that. It's really kind of completes my thoughts. It's fascinating what he's saying. But just to go back to my dumb question, what did you do before this painting machine?
And when I was answering, so I was making, so I've been making machines a long time now. So before the machines was really at the Slade, and at the Slade I was obsessed by, I suppose, you know, what I was doing was I was making, I felt really, I think, I suppose I was trying to find what I was going to make. I was trying to give myself permission to have, so I went to to the Slade to study painting, and actually I spent 4 years replicating Slade walls. But I was looking for the language, like I couldn't, you know, like I was, and the Slade walls are really beautiful, by the way. So like, you know, so I was building these beautiful, accurate replicas of curved walls, and I was, literally accurately replicating them. And so there you go. There's a need to distance myself from gesture, but be able to talk about them in relation to painting. And then, like I said a minute ago, then I just started dipping them. Like, so I needed them to get, how could they get a history quickly? How could I give them a history quickly? And so then I started making, so my studio at the Slade was brilliant because it would I had like just tents of drying. So I would lower these paintings into vats of paint and pull them out by hand and lower them and pull them out. And then I just realised that it was this wonderful. What I was interested in was trying to position the viewer not in a static encounter. So kind of, you know, open up the encounter so that the possibility of the work was also there for the audience, not just me. So they could be inside the production. I mean, they're not inside the production, actually. They're inside one element of the production. So I think I might start to position the viewer inside all of the production. So I might start, so for the PhD I've started to write these manuals that like would allow you to, so I could send you the manual and you could build it. I mean, like that's the plan. But that the manual would allow anyone they would phone me or they'd borrow my pump and they could build it. And so that actually the build of the machine could become a kind of social event. It was crazy, horrible. It's not horrible. It's not a horrible object, but it was a horrible process.
Sorry, can I also follow up with the slate question? Because I was there as well, so I know what it's like being around those walls. So I was wondering what made you stay there, as well as for the undergraduates, as well as for the master. So that's totally must have been what, 6 years, right?
Yeah, a really long time. So, well, it was a person that made me stay, not like a boyfriend or anything. Tash Duray was the head of postgraduate painting at the time. So when I applied to the Slade undergraduate, so I came from the north of England. I didn't really know what the Slade. I wanted to go to the Ruskin, didn't get in. Applied to the Slade as a second option. But anyway, got in. Was a bit shocked. Ended up in London. Spent 4 years there, terrified. But in my then found my way in the final year. And there was an amazing woman, Tess Duray, who I mean, Sean knows Tess's work, and she was making these amazing. She was making not just paintings, but she was doing like works in cities with. So she did the Bullring in. She was just this awesome woman, like a presence that used to come onto the undergraduate. And she smoked and she was awesome. She had a massive hair and she was like tall. I'm very tall. And I think I just fell a bit in love with her. Until
you included her in the Fully Awake show as the person.
And she was the most, I didn't
realise until then, you told me then that in fact you wrote in the catalogue that she was the first female ever to teach at the Slade, and I'd never realised.
Yeah. And I wasn't ready. Like I'd only just found, I don't know, you find your feet, don't you, in different like so many people were desperate to leave the Slade and I was desperate to stay, like, because I just found my feet and I knew, and actually staying at the same place to do your postgraduate is also like really weird because all your friends have gone and you're still there. So even though it's a real privilege to be there for 2 more years, I actually felt at first it was quite a kind of strange grieving process because everyone I knew had kind of, but it was Tess really. And just, I mean, I've never left art school, that's the top and bottom of it. Like, so when I finished there, I got a post at Chelsea, a kind of research, like a teaching post, and then after there I started teaching at Bath, and then I went and did my PhD. I can't be away from the art school. I love that space of learning with art, like really love it. Like I think it's a real privilege to be around people trying to figure out what they're doing. It just feels like the most privileged. It feels so bizarre now not to be in the studios with everyone, but like it just feels so, yeah. Did you do your undergraduate there?
Yes, I did. And I actually applied for the MA, but got accepted, but at the end decided not to go.
Right. Did you go and do your MA somewhere else?
Yeah, I just spent 2 years at the Royal Drawing School, at the Princess Drawing School.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, it's like people's journeys are so, like I could totally see for some people it would not have been right. For me, it was like it was just right to stay for another 2, just and of course it's really different now, but you got funding and it came with funding, and it was like 2 more years in a studio with the brilliant Tess Duray as my tutor. So
yeah,
funny because I probably would tell my undergraduate students it's not a good idea to stay at the same place.
Has anybody else got any questions for Natasha? Now, Stu, it's not like you not have a question.
I probably talk too much.
Nastya, Rita, Lisa? I've got a question then.
Go for it, Sean.
Do you because you did sort of, you've just been explaining that you did painting at the Slade.
Yeah.
But I know that you were also talking to Phila de Barlo and people like that.
Go on, sorry, Sean, I didn't hear you. Go on.
Well, I know you were in the painting school, but you've also taught that you talked to me about the fact that you were talking to Phila de Barlo and people like that who were at the Slade.
Yeah.
I wondered whether you considered yourself whether you cited your work within the sort of whether you framed it within painting or within sculpture or almost within performance.
It's hold on a minute, I've done something really weird to my phone and I don't know what it is. Hold on. I think I've just called the emergency services number. So I think about my work as I've always been challenged by where to put the practice, and at the Slade it was actually kind of at the Slade that was really, really obvious. That kind of battle was obvious. So when you went to the Slade, you applied into a discipline, and I applied to painting. So I ended up upstairs. It was upstairs, and sculpture was downstairs. But I never felt I actually ever settled in painting. And so I went downstairs to sculpture for about 6 weeks, and John Aitken and Philida and that brilliant, I made Ed Allington, and it was an amazing group of people taught in sculpture. But I never, I totally fell out of my depth with the way they talked about their objects, and suddenly realised the language of painting. I needed the language of painting to frame. And there was a lovely moment in a teaching painting conference where someone talked about it being like a swimming pool. So painting's like a swimming pool, and then when it gets too full, the water laps over the edges, but it always finds its way back into the pool. And I suppose it's a bit, my work's it's always been framed by painting. Even if it's trying to escape it all the time, it's a bit like I said about the armature. I just needed an armature, I needed a history to kind of pin it to, and it's the language. It definitely relies on the language of painting and the history of painting, and actually it was only when I went downstairs to sculpture I totally realised that it didn't speak the language of sculpture. It speaks the language of painting, but it bashes against those edges all the time. But actually, you're right, I probably don't look at painters. I don't really look at painters. I mean, having done loads of workshops with you, and probably the artists I'm looking at are performance or event-based or sculptural. So there is something about whether the language has suffocated it, maybe, but it's nice when you suddenly go, oh, what's the relevance? I had a brilliant, when I first got to the Ruskin, Brian Catlin, who was my supervisor, went, what's the point of the wall? What's the point of paint? What's the point? That thing that you do as a tutor, you kind of throw everything up in the air. And I cycled home really furious at him, I'm more grown up than that. And I think it is really important to ask, what is the relevance of the language of painting? What's the relevance of the wall? So now I'm trying to test out whether I can get rid of the stretcher but getting rid of the stretcher is still a conversation about the stretcher, and the stretcher is painting. And so I like the limitations of it in a way, I suppose. I don't make sculpture.
The other thing that interested me about the work about the practice, Natasha, is that it seems to occupy that territory that is part, even when the work's exhibited, it's almost partly in the studio, because the work is still being made when it's in an exhibition context, because it's gradually being made. So it seems to sort of partly expose the studio practice. Often what we see is we see a finished work that's put into a gallery situation, and you sort of expose the work to its being made whilst it's actually being exhibited. And I wondered if that was important to you.
Yeah. I think the vulnerability of it. I think vulnerable is an interesting word to use in those in relation to that. So, you know, like, I mean, but at the same time, I suppose in some ways there's a contradiction, and you know, you've just picked up on it. You know, you're right. There is a sense of you being inside the production of these objects, but the machines are already highly produced. So there is both. There is a system that's highly conceived of and very meticulously made. But then there is this kind of function, this event, or kind of this generative event that is occurring, and objects being made that you are party to, and the potential for failure or spillage or misbehavior is shared with the audience. So, and often they also wrap the audience. So there is a sense of you being in the center of this kind of live event, and there is the smell and, you know, the tinkering. So there is a sense, there is an exposure of that that is important. And I really like that kind of, actually, I feel like they might even need to be more vulnerable. So like maybe they are built, there could be something, because the build is really meticulous and event, so there could be something. That's why I think the manual's quite interesting, because actually I wonder, there's something about the stage before the machines that's also kind of starting to become quite intriguing. But yeah, you're right, Sean. There's a contradiction, I think, because they're like both really highly thought through, and then incredibly kind of what I love about it is, in the moment where I turn them on for the first time, I have no idea what the hell is going to happen either. Like, so in the Modern Art Oxford show, like when I feel, so the paintings were as tall as me and they're a little bit thinner than me, and they were like, and I started to fill them, and I thought, oh my god, they just kept filling and filling and filling and filling, and they were just sucking in paint, like, and I thought, what was amazing was the pores of the canvas, so the holes in the canvas suddenly started to kind of like start to stretch, and paint started seeping out in the wrong places, and I was like, these are like, they're going to explode. They're literally going to explode. And what was lovely was they started to mend themselves, so like little scabs sealed, and they ran beautifully, and they surprised me because they kind of mended themselves, and they were much more full than I'd ever anticipated. So there's definitely a sense of which I am finding things out about them at the same time as you are. And I hate that, and I love it at the same time.
Brilliant. Has anybody else got any final questions for Natasha? Okay, that was absolutely brilliant, Natasha. Thank you so much for being.
It's really lovely to meet you all. Hopefully I'll get over there at some point.
It would be great to have you in Moscow, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for such brilliant questions. It was like really lovely, kind of thoughtful, intelligent, really thoughtful. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Great, thank you. And we'll talk soon. I'm going to let Misha turn it off because he's hosting now.
Thank you, Natasha.
Bye, Misha. Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.